Welcome, bespoke, bespectacled viewers, to the show where we won't answer your burning questions like, what blackmail material does Ezra Miller have on the entire entertainment industry? And where can I get some? Welcome to Cartoon Gateway, the show where I talk about the average trials and tribulations of a cartoon fan. I'm your host, David Hollander. Today, we've got a topic I'm sure you haven't seen before, reboots and revivals. You know, that thing everyone who talks about the state of the media talks about, and it's so overdone, you have no doubt zoned out already. So, in order to cover this, I have to acknowledge how overdone this is in order to cover it. This is an Ouroboros of tedium. Which brings me to modern media. What's with all the reboots? First off, let's stop acting like this is a new thing. People have been asking this since the 90s. Modern art is dead. Intellectual property rules all, and that didn't suddenly become the case. You just got old enough to notice. Is there a way to fix the entertainment industry? Who knows? You didn't come to this show to get all confrontational about the state of media. You came here because, I assume, you found this by accident. I'm only 2 episodes in. I won't act like I know my fans. I wanted to use this episode to talk about something very specific, and to do that, I'm gonna ramble about something vaguely related while talking around the point for a while. If you watched my first episode and didn't see this coming, you need to work on your pattern recognition skills. So, what is a reboot? Yes, this is the level of basic we're reaching for. Reboot, when an intellectual property gets brought back in some way. Wait, that's not a good definition, because that would make sequels reboots. How about when a franchise gets brought back in some way? That also doesn't work, because sometimes intellectual properties with only one entry get rebooted, and I'd hardly call one thing a franchise. How about a word fans made up that doesn't have a real meaning because it gets used so loosely? Yeah, that works. I've seen the term thrown around a lot, and personally, I couldn't tell you the exact definition because it seems like every time someone uses it, the definition changes slightly. Here's how I've always defined a reboot. When an intellectual property is brought back and continuity is completely reset. For instance, the Amazing Spider-Man movies pretty clearly don't take place in the same universe as the Sam Raimi trilogy. I know every Spider-Man multiverse movie has kind of muddied the waters on that front, but generally speaking, you don't need context from the older movies to watch the older but not as old movies. That's always been my measure of a reboot. This isn't the same thing as a revival to me. Revivals are more specific to TV shows and cartoons, and these are also weirdly common. Think of the distinction like this for a moment, if you will. To me, when a show gets canceled, it's like you're turning off the TV. In a reboot, you're replacing that TV. But in a revival, you're just turning the TV back on like nothing happened. With revivals, a show just comes back, business as usual. Like that revival of Frasier that I'm convinced grew out of the mildew because who demanded that the most white bread plain show in existence be brought back? That said, you can probably see why the 2020 version of Animaniacs drives me up a wall. I enjoy the show, but this is what I mean when I say the word reboot has been muddled to the point of being meaningless, because I don't know if this really is a reboot by the definition I've known all my life. In practical terms, this is just a revival. It's just more of the same show. Continuity wasn't reset, at least what little continuity there was. I'm sorry for making you think about continuity in Animaniacs, and it is, by and large, the same show. But it self-identifies as a reboot. To them, season 1 was their season 1, not season 1 of the original show. Call it whatever you want. I call it confusing. My point is, I'd be more confident in using the term reboot if there weren't instances of franchises using the term in very inconsistent ways. And now that I've pointed that out, congratulations! You can now add this to the list of reasons you hate reboots on top of all the other ones. So how about I talk about the actual subject of this show? Cartoons. This is Cartoon Gateway. I'm the opposite of a gatekeeper. I probably shouldn't have waited for the second episode of this show to explain that very central joke. So let's go through the titular gateway and talk about cartoons. The weird thing is, reboots are insanely common, but unlike with the film industry, this really is a somewhat recent thing. At least the 90s didn't really have this. For instance, Transformers gets rebooted quite a bit, but despite being around since the mid-80s, they didn't get a proper reboot until 2001. Robots in Disguise, also known as Robots in Disguise. No, not the same show I talked about last episode because this franchise reuses subtitles too often. If you want to abbreviate it, it's Transformers Rudensitabled Fistro. You usually see this with superhero franchises, but I don't want to go back down that rabbit hole 2 episodes in a row. Comic franchises are quick to reboot in media. Let's not even get into the great Cartoon Network wave of reboots of the 2010s. I wonder every night if they'd still be around properly if maybe they hadn't gotten so bogged down by those kinds of shows. But then I remember that time Disney rebooted DuckTales and proved the system could actually work, making something critically and financially successful. Well done, crew of 2017's DuckTales. I hope you can sleep at night knowing what you've done. But when it comes to outright cartoon revivals, you don't see that too often. You've seen the petitions, we've all signed them, and deep in our hearts, we all know that it's not going to do anything. Young Justice coming back after half a decade was a nice surprise, but let's face it, the only reason Warner Brothers bought that show back was because they needed DC-themed content for that DC streaming service that crashed and burned. Warner Brothers in particular seems to view content as a quota to me. It's the same reason they released a Snyder Cut. They didn't want to release that thing, but they had a gap in release schedule and got paranoid about filling it. And aside from Young Justice, there aren't too many cases of outright revivals. Cases where a show just comes back, all business as usual. Hello, nice day at the office. We're starting to see them more. Clone High and Johnny Test came back for a few seconds each, and we're starting to see even more. But right now, straight revivals just aren't too common, without serious changes or alterations into the realm of spin-offs. When shows die, they almost always stay dead somehow. No amount of petitions is going to bring a show back unless it aligns with a frantic company's agenda. But there is one major case that's an exception, the case that I've been talking around this whole time, so I guess I should get to the point. Futurama! I think I figured out why cartoon revivals aren't too common, because Futurama is some kind of good luck magnet. If only Futurama had been standing a few feet to the left, some of that good luck might have gone to the Zeta Project, and that show might still be around. I almost said that with a straight face, no. Seriously, this show has died and come back on 3 separate occasions. That might not sound like much, because 3 is a small number, right? 3 is a large number of pets to own. 3 is a concerning amount of car crashes to be in. 3 is too many salads to eat in a meal. Don't argue with me on that. I don't even think I have a proper way to convey how insane coming back to life 3 times would be, but
sweet zombie Jesus,
this show just won't stay dead. And okay, maybe this is a dead horse by this point, but by all that's holy, there's something to be talked about here. How did Futurama come back from cancellation 3 times? Were there any mistakes made along the way? What can we learn from each revival? Strap in, buckaroos. I just learned my first lesson. Strap in, buckaroos is not the catchphrase for me. First off, how did Futurama come back? The first time, I mean. They ran for 5 seasons on Fox back in the early 2000s. I know the first season was in 1999, but I refuse to call something that was only around in 1999 a 90s show. So yeah, they ran for 4 seasons. 4 seasons or 5, what? Okay, I checked every wiki I could find. There were 4 production seasons, but the first one sometimes gets split into 2. So depending on if you go by episode listing or production order, it's either 4 or 5. And that'll probably inform how this video is written, okay? Does that make sense? Swank. And now I've learned that swank isn't the catchphrase for me. I will nail this, I swear! Anyway, Futurama got canceled. And like many shows of its era, people declared that it was canceled before its time. Seems like a bit of an over-exaggeration if you ask me. Not that I didn't want more Futurama, but the show got 4 or 5 seasons. That's more than most underrated cartoons get. The Oblongs only got 1 season. No one started a riot over that. Maybe that's because no one watched it. But then, everybody's favorite adult-oriented cartoon that starts with an F came back. Family Guy. Remember that? Family Guy got canceled, and not just in the usual way it does, by making an episode about domestic violence. No, they got canceled. No more episodes. And this was in the age before social media, so how was Family Guy going to come back? DVD sales. I won't date this episode by calling DVD of all things retro, so instead, I'll date it by discussing the most recent military conflict that comes to mind. The Falklands conflict happened off the coast of South America. Yeah, this was the age of DVD sales being big, and Family Guy was a massive success in that department. Then Adult Swim started airing reruns, and turns out they were doing spectacularly, so Fox did what they always do when they're being outdone. They got jealous, and they renewed Family Guy for more seasons, technically for the 2nd time, but that's another story. Now, why does this apply to Futurama? Well, take a popular adult-oriented cartoon But anyways, a popular adult-oriented cartoon comes back from the dead due to high DVD sales and popularity with reruns. And the show also airs on Fox, the same network that just pushed the pillow down on Futurama. Then Adult Swim aired reruns of Futurama, and the parallels mount.
Stewie, do you know if Fox has any plans to bring back Futurama?
What magazine are you from?
Entertainment Weekly.
So, how did Futurama come back in an age when revivals like this didn't happen? Simple, a series of direct-to-DVD movies. Well, it started with just one, Bender's Big Score, released in 2008. Then, between 2008 and February 2009, they added Beast with a Billion Backs, Bender's Game, and Into the Wild Green Yonder. These movies were all a fun time, if you ask me. They all feel a little different from the show, but you can mostly chalk that up to the movie format and a team of writers being out of practice writing the characters for a few years, though these were also aired on TV. Each movie split up into 4 individual episodes, which is how I watch these things. Now, what do these movies tell us about the state of Futurama at this time and the point of the revival movie? Because a lot of times when cartoons come back, all they'll get is a revival movie, and in many cases that's their finale. Like I said, Futurama the Luck Magnet, if they'd been standing a bit further back, we'd have another season of Wolverine and the X-Men or something. Well, the revival movie format doesn't necessarily suit every show that gets one, and Futurama definitely shows that off. Bender's Big Score, for instance, just ends on a cliffhanger that gets resolved in the next movie, Beast with a Billion Backs, and that is not the kind of thing the series really did. Nor did the other revival movies flow into each other like this, so it feels sort of off. Imagine if the show really ended with that first revival movie. Just saying, bit of a risky play that might have changed how Futurama was viewed. I know that Futurama occasionally did running plots, but being serialized really doesn't suit it in most cases, and the movies flop back and forth on whether or not it works for them. On the one hand, plots that could have been an entire season got covered in one place, like that business with Lars in Bender's Big Score. But on the other hand, ideas were dragged out in ways the show really didn't do, especially with all the unnecessary cliffhangers. Like I said, these writers either hadn't touched these characters in ages, or they were new writers who wanted to do new things. But then again, Into the Wild Green Yonder was a pretty great finale, so I guess I can live with these movies getting a bit out of the ordinary with what they wanted to do. And then, silence. Only for a bit. Comedy Central, of all networks, swooped in saying they picked up Futurama for a 26-episode season. And then, they renewed them with another 26 episodes. This resulted in, you guessed it, an additional 2 seasons. Hulu, we need to have a talk about your episode listings. So now Futurama was back, but properly this time, at least in terms of format. Why did I slip into British? We're keeping that in, but well, remember how I said the feel was off last time around? Well, now it's even more so because those first few episodes didn't go over well. Episode 1 of season 7, we'll call it, pretty hastily picked up the pieces left by the last finale, and the next few episodes were some of the most poorly received of the series' entire run. Why is that? Part of it might be because they tried getting super topical. These episodes kind of cribbed more from South Park and Family Guy and tried to be relevant, so as a result, they were extremely dated with social commentary, somehow, despite being set in the future. And being dated wouldn't have been that much of a problem if these few episodes felt like the show. Attack of the Killer Rat features a 2-headed goat named Mr. Chunks. What one hen throws up, they feed to the other. That doesn't feel like Futurama, that feels like a Mad Lib the writers of South Park deeply regret. Not to say the Comedy Central episodes were all bad, they made what are arguably some of the best episodes in the series, like The Late Philip J. Fry and Lethal Inspection. The weird thing is, satirizing the real world is nothing new for the show, but these seasons did not put their best foot forward in that regard. A string of a few bad episodes in a row soured a lot of people's impression of these new episodes, but the Comedy Central era of Futurama came to a close with Meanwhile, what is arguably the best finale the show's ever had, which at this point is 3, maybe 4, depending on if you count overclockwise. That's another thing to keep in mind. Basically, every time Futurama makes a finale, they tend to make it the best they possibly can, especially so with Meanwhile. I'm a guy who despises endings, but as endings go, I absolutely adore this ending. We still have to sort out how Hulu can't get the number of seasons straight, but they had an ending. Though I guess we can't exactly tell Hulu what to do, anymore at least, since as of 2023, they're the ones calling the shots, with their officially labeled Season 11 of Futurama. I don't have the fingers to... I could have just done this, but that's also 2. The downside of getting brought back when there's already an ending is that that ending is suddenly a lot less meaningful. When I first heard about this revival, my first thought was... why
Why?
Surely Futurama was the one long-running show for adults that got to die with dignity. Why are we still bothering? I watched a recent episode of The Simpsons. All of the voice actors sounded like they were there at gunpoint. Does anyone really want that for Futurama? I asked some friends what benefit there could be to a revival of Futurama at this point, and the response across the board was, so they could satirize more modern things and be topical. But as we've established, doing that has resulted in some of the worst episodes of the show. So what's the point? I'm not gonna outright review the Hulu run of Futurama. They're only 10 episodes into their first 20 episode order, and it feels wrong to make definitive statements on a show that's still currently running. I will say, however, that this revival certainly started out on a better note than the last one. Obviously, there was still some of that dated commentary I was afraid of. Let me put it like this. The first 5 episodes of the Comedy Central revival include what are, in my opinion, 3 of the worst episodes of the show: Rebirth, which was more confusing than anything, and The Da Vinci Code, which was only kind of alright. The first 5 episodes of the Hulu revival include 3 episodes that are admittedly dated commentary, but it's some of the only tolerable dated commentary in the show. There's a sequel to one of their most beloved episodes that Fox made, and then there's Children of a Lesser Bog, which despite all its faults is the first truly emotional episode centered around Amy, a character who's desperately needed an episode like this for ages. They knew what they wanted to add to the series, and in my personal opinion, they're starting off much funnier than the Comedy Central episodes did. Yeah, it's trying a bit too hard to be relevant, but so were those early Comedy Central episodes. At least these ones make me laugh more. So what works with bringing back a show and what doesn't work? Well, let's look at the good and bad things all 3 revivals did: DVD movies, Comedy Central, and Hulu. With the DVD movies, some of their problems came from just being a different format. And even when converted into separate episodes, the movies made some pretty haphazard changes to the show. Firstly, confirming an overarching will they won't they relationship between the 2 main leads by the end. That's a welcome change. But on the other hand, hesitant to spoil by the way, but Bender's Game has a status quo change that by all rights you think would change how the show operates, but the rest of the show basically ignores it. So yeah, being in a different format didn't help these guys, and while they kind of played to their strengths in the new format, they didn't go all the way in their direction, being like the show or standing out from it. Meanwhile, some of the worst things Comedy Central did was ignoring the status quo shifts, and a general indecisiveness when it came to committing to new ideas. Between Fry and Leela being back to square one, and how they handled Amy, they really had no interest in building on what came before. They basically reset the characters back a certain point. That allowed characters to get away with things they otherwise wouldn't be doing, in a show that previously had 5 seasons. Stop messing with me, Hulu episode listings. But other than that, there is no real benefit. And speaking of Hulu, just to end on a positive note, let's talk about what they did right, because by all accounts, they're doing well so far. They actually committed to depicting character growth from previous runs of the show. Fry and Leela went from a perpetual will they won't they for a decade to being a genuinely wholesome and committed couple. Wanna feel old? Amy has kids now. It's not perfect all around, but it's a remarkable effort we otherwise don't see much. And a lot of these things can be applied to any cartoon revival. Minimize format changes if possible, but if not, commit to format changes. Expand on ideas, and build upon what came before instead of just retreading old ground. Evolve more than you detract. Changing things can be scary for both fans who want to see their favorite thing preserved and writers who have to deal with the outrage that comes from that. Just be confident and think through the changes you make. But also, and this is an important thing to talk about, only do an outright revival if there's room for it. There are a ton of shows I see people asking to come back, and in some of those cases, there are shows that had pretty definitive endings. Like, how exactly would you pick up a show where all antagonistic forces were dealt with and the protagonists have been meaningfully changed? Futurama is pretty lucky in that. Every time that it's ended, there's always some room to continue, even with changes. So, yeah, that's all I had to say about reboots and revivals in cartoons. Learn from Futurama. And do your best, aspiring reboot writers. We all know you'd rather be working on something more enriching, but art is dead. Best lean into it. This has been Cartoon Gateway. I was and am your host, David Hollander. Tune in next time, where we won't answer your burning questions like, when they said the South will rise again, did they mean sea level?
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.